Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Release the Snyder Cut, the crazy true story behind the fight that saved Zack Snyder's Justice League, by Sean O'Connell. Narrated by George Newbern. Author's Note. Everything happens for a reason. That has been a personal belief of mine for decades. Nothing quite as extreme as a Jerry Maguire-type mission statement. Just a realization that I've encountered enough happy accidents over the course of my life to accept the fact that something else is guiding our path, and that even though we might not fully understand why at the time, everything happens for a reason. One of those coincidences occurred at a pivotal moment for this particular book. In fact, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that if this event didn't happen, you probably wouldn't be listening to Release the Snyder Cut right now. It's September 25th, 2019. I'm in the earliest stages of this project, which means I've told a small band of trusted friends about my idea for a book about the failed Justice League movie, and the fight waged by Zack Snyder's fans to convince Warner Brothers Studios to eventually release his original version of the superhero blockbuster. I'd done just enough legwork to get a proposal in place to appeal to literary agents. After a handful of rejections, par for the course, I'm told, a literary agent emails me expressing interest. Folks, an email of that sort legitimately feels like a life preserver being tossed to a drowning man. That sounds extreme, I know, but when you embark on the daunting task of attempting to write your first book, every step of the process is drenched in uncertainty. You are convinced that blind pitches sent to potential collaborators are being ignored, or worse, tossed in the trash. So to hear that even one person believes in your concept is a gift. The aforementioned agent asked to read the first 3 chapters. Outstanding. However, I'd only written one. Okay, I'd only written part of one. Not a problem. I was flush with vacation days at Cinema Blend, the entertainment website for which I work, and was looking for a reason to use them. I carved out 3 weekdays in October and planned to hunker down to complete the requested pages. Writers love assignments and thrive under deadlines, right? Also, someone actually wanted to read more of my work. That had to be interpreted as a positive sign. Well, yes, but little did I know that an even bigger sign was heading my way. A vote of confidence from those aforementioned higher powers that are constantly waiting for the right moment to metaphorically tap you on the shoulder and say, "Pay attention, this is important." As the vacation days approached, an email dropped into my inbox containing an invitation to a movie set. This happens regularly at Cinema Blend. We're lucky enough to spend time on film sets on a consistent basis, learning about the movie-making process from the artists we admire. This invitation was different, though. It was for Netflix's original production of Army of the Dead, directed by Zack Snyder. The coincidence was too much to bear. I've been on a Snyder set before, as you'll hear later. I was on the set of Snyder's Justice League, back when it was still Snyder's Justice League. So I've seen the filmmaker in action. But to be invited to the set of the next Zack Snyder movie while I am plotting a book about an old Zack Snyder movie, what are the chances? Slim. I'd have to say slim. Additionally, I knew I'd eventually be asking Snyder for contributions to this book. Visiting his Army of the Dead set might not give me the chance to mention this project to him directly. Film sets are consistently humming workspaces, and no one's busier than the director on an active set, but at least it would provide face time so that when I reached out to him later for his thoughts on the Snyder Cut of Justice League, he'd put 2 and 2 together and realize I was a legitimate film journalist who possesses an active interest in his work. By the way, that worked. Shortly after announcing that Zack Snyder's Justice League would come to HBO Max, the director sat down for an exclusive interview for this book. I love it when a plan comes together. The sheer coincidence of the timing of these events still boggles my mind. Everything happens for a reason. And the reason this time ends up being the book that I hope you are about to enjoy. 1. I reckon you should show it. Zack Snyder didn't get out of bed the morning of May 20th, 2020, expecting to invent a new holiday. but you better believe fans of the acclaimed film director will circle that date on the calendar and celebrate it with the reverence of a holy day. In their community, May 20th will forever be remembered as the day the Holy Grail of superhero movies was secured, the day Hollywood finally announced plans to release the Snyder Cut of the director's mythical Justice League movie. I've seen my share of craziness while covering the film industry, from meteoric rises to devastating failures. At the 2017 Oscars, Warren Beatty announced the wrong movie as the Academy Awards Best Picture winner. That was crazy. Still, nothing I've encountered over the past 3 decades has been as fascinating, uplifting, and unpredictable as the story of the Release the Snyder Cut, or RTSC, movement. Unified fronts in Hollywood fandom are few and far between. Fans, by definition, are fanatics who live to debate about the things they love. For that reason, it's rare to see a fandom accomplish any sort of stated goal. The RTSC movement formed over a shared belief in the existence of an alternate version of the 2017 superhero movie Justice League. Snyder walked away from the comic book blockbuster for deeply personal reasons, though many still believe he was permitted to quit before the studio Warner Brothers fired him. A replacement director was hired to complete post-production, maintaining the movie's release date. Once Justice League opened, though, the fans who had waited years to see DC Comics' top heroes together on screen for the first time realized something had gone wrong. Snyder's footage was nowhere to be found in the theatrical cut, and Snyder, responding to his fan base's inquiries, repeatedly whipped his followers into a frenzy by teasing the existence of his own cut, the Snyder Cut. Snyder essentially laid down a gauntlet, and his dedicated fans picked it up. They bonded together as a team and worked tirelessly on behalf of his lost cut of Justice League until Warner Brothers agreed to let them see it. The members of the vocal global RTSC community range from rabid social media warriors to actual cast members of Snyder's DC films. And while this book will cover in great detail the behind-the-scenes Hollywood story of how the Snyder Cut of Justice League was ushered into the world faster than any other controversial director's cut of a botched movie, it's also about the individual members of the RTSC movement and their impressive accomplishments. Snyder believes that the cut of Justice League that's currently heading to HBO Max wouldn't exist without the movement's persistence. He may have guided them along in key moments, but it was these fans who made this happen. Snyder himself told me, "I owe them a huge debt of gratitude because, of course, there would be no director's cut or Snyder Cut. It wouldn't exist in a way that anyone would ever see it if it weren't for them, and that's just a fact." The story begins with Zack Snyder signing on to shepherd the DC Extended Universe, DCEU, in 2010. Snyder is a visionary filmmaker whose resume includes such features as 300, Dawn of the Dead, Sucker Punch, and the faithful adaptation of Alan Moore's controversial graphic novel, Watchmen. But he's best known in the comic book and pop culture community as the man who built a cinematic universe out of DC Comics' top assets for Warner Brothers, until he was ordered to stop. Snyder was handpicked by director Christopher Nolan, Batman Begins, The Dark Knight, and hired by Warner Brothers Studios to revive a dormant Superman franchise and potentially launch a DC shared cinematic universe on screen. The director tapped actors Henry Cavill, Amy Adams, Russell Crowe, Michael Shannon, Diane Lane, Kevin Costner, and more to bring DC's iconic Blue Boy Scout, Superman, to the big screen in the 2013 origin story, Man of Steel. It was a fresh start for a character famously portrayed by the late Christopher Reeve in multiple Superman movies in the 1980s. It also marked a different, more aggressive tone for the Man of Steel, one that divided fans. The Superman who anchors Man of Steel isn't the pure beacon of hope that audiences have grown to love, not yet anyway. His alien powers are new and scary. Clark Kent, Cavill, questions his role as a godlike savior living amongst men, and is even warned by his adoptive father against helping people in need, because he's told it might be more valuable to protect his identity. The repercussions of some of the creative choices made in Man of Steel are still being debated by dedicated DC fans. Part of the online community, as an example, still vehemently disagree with Snyder's decision to have Superman kill his newfound nemesis, General Zod, Shannon, by snapping his neck at the conclusion of their destructive battle. Remember, fans love to debate about the things that they love. Snyder continued telling Superman's updated origin story in the 2015 team-up adventure, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, and approximately half of its sequel, Justice League, before his vision fell apart. The film studio, allegedly reacting to disappointing box office receipts and mainstream audience apathy for Batman vs. Superman, decided to change horses midstream. They hired a different director with a superhero pedigree, Marvel Studios veteran Joss Whedon, to complete the Justice League work that Snyder had started. This was, to put it lightly, highly unusual. Whedon was a Marvel guy, having helmed 2 high-profile Avengers movies for Disney and Marvel Studios. Several fans found it strange that Whedon was willing to jump ship and help the rival DC complete its first live-action Justice League movie. It was an unprecedented move. Also, it didn't work. Whedon's version of Justice League ended up being a critical and commercial failure. And Snyder's fans, still furious over his removal from the project, immediately began demanding retribution. The problems extended beyond one film. Multiple Warner Brothers movies that were meant to follow Snyder's Justice League were altered by the studio's decision to replace him with Joss Whedon. Snyder at the time was the captain of the larger DCEU ship. This grand experiment would include individual films from multiple DC superheroes such as Wonder Woman, The Flash, and Green Lantern. But Snyder also had teased a 5-film story arc of his own that would have been developed in his Justice League movie, and fans who had bought into his storytelling method felt like that potential had been ripped away. In online conversations held after the theatrical release of Joss Whedon's Justice League, Snyder fans began to question how much of the film the director had managed to complete on his version of Justice League before he left the project. They speculated how different the structure and tone of the lost Justice League movie was going to be from the final version Warner Brothers eventually released to theaters. And perhaps more importantly, they asked themselves, and anyone else who would listen, if Snyder's original cut of Justice League could ever be salvaged. The mother of all our questions. On May 20th, 2020, concrete answers to a number of those inquiries finally started to form. In truth, this happened much quicker than even Snyder expected. I never would have thought, I've got to be honest, that it would work out like this, the director said. Well, I never thought it was going to work out on this timetable, let's put it that way. On the morning of May 20th, Snyder hosted a Man of Steel viewing party from his home theater in Southern California. Online attendees were able to sync their own copies of the 2013 movie to the director's and watch along with him on the social media platform Vero, while he provided a live audio commentary track. Snyder had promised to field a few questions afterward, which created mild buzz in the RTSC community. They wondered if this finally would be the event for which they had been waiting, an announcement of a potential release of the Justice League cut they'd been demanding to see. As the Man of Steel screening drew to a close, and Snyder started preparing for the question and answer session, fans understood that something extraordinary was about to happen, because the movie's star, Henry Cavill, suddenly joined Zack and his wife, Deborah, for a very special announcement. I think the second Henry showed up, my heart just knew it was happening, said Giovanni Torres, a 31-year-old product manager from New York City and a die-hard RTSC member. Torres joined the RTSC family during the earliest stages of the movement and fought daily alongside fans who wanted to see Snyder's vision for Justice League restored. It was a 3-year wait to hear Snyder say the words, confirming his plan to release the Snyder Cut, and Torres admits that in the moment he could hardly believe it was happening. Honestly, he said, the whole time watching the Q&A stream, I was so nervous. I heard nothing that was happening in the film, or what Zack was saying. When Henry showed up, I knew. That's not to say they rushed to the announcement. In hindsight, it's borderline cruel that Snyder put his historic Snyder Cut reveal at the end of a full screening of Man of Steel. Like Taurus, all of Snyder's fans endured the screening and director's commentary, praying that they'd be rewarded with breaking Snyder Cut news. But Snyder is a born showman, and he knew that in this moment he had his audience eating out of the palm of his hand. So Cavill and the Snyders leisurely reminisced about the filming of Man of Steel and the massive impact the role had on the actor's career. Their stroll down memory lane eventually expanded into a spirited conversation as hand-picked fans joined the Zoom call with prearranged inquiries. The group covered a wide range of topics, dancing around the only question every audience member wanted to hear. Finally, Snyder fan Daniela Caras from Chile, South America, cut through the nonsense. "I have a question that is the mother of all of our questions as fandom," she said. "When will you release the Snyder Cut?" Even through cyberspace, you could feel the air get sucked out of the room. Caras admits she barely slept the night before, wrestling with the right way to phrase the question. She didn't want Snyder to misinterpret it or weasel out of answering. "I really thought it was the longest shot ever," Caras told me after the fact, "but the chance was unique." Snyder playfully tried to deflect. He told viewers that he wasn't fully in control of the distribution situation for the Snyder Cut, and even if he could show it, what would his version of Justice League even look like? But no one intended to let Snyder off the hook, not after years of waiting. "I reckon you should show it," Cavill said. The fan base held its collective breath. "I mean, I can't show the movie right now," Snyder replied, "because there's still a little bit to do. But I mean, there is this. I do have this. I don't know if this is helpful." At that point, Snyder turned his own laptop to face the camera, so everyone tuned into the feed could see the black and white image of his Justice League cast. The photo had a JL logo and the title Zack Snyder's Justice League. Beneath the title was the confirmation fans fought 3 long years to secure: 2021, only on HBO Max. "So that's coming," Snyder concluded, as the gathered fans gasped and cheered. Victory, finally, was theirs. A vocal minority. Weeks after the Snyder Cut reveal, when the fever pitch surrounding the anticipated HBO Max announcement had cooled to a simmer, Snyder reflected on the impact of the day. He still was feeling the emotional reverberations of the RTSC movement's hard-fought win. "I wanted to honor what the fans had created by trying to do this announcement in a way that would be dramatic or cool," he said. "Our intent was just to try and honor what everyone had done by giving them a reveal that was worth the effort, if that was possible. And the truth is, I don't even know if that, as a concept, was possible." Snyder understood better than anyone how much time and energy was spent raising and maintaining awareness for the Snyder Cut of Justice League. He had tracked every step of the fierce battle waged by the RTSC family to convince Warner Brothers to allow him to finish his incomplete vision. He supported their efforts to educate naysayers by posting exclusive behind-the-scenes imagery to social media. He backed the charitable fundraising campaigns that often were associated with the RTSC movement. And he shared what would have been his dream scenario plan for the celebratory Snyder Cut reveal if the world had not been drastically affected by the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. "Ideally, on this timetable, I would have tried to hold it until Comic-Con. That was my dream," he said. "If Comic-Con existed in another world. That's the Holy Grail. It would have been the Holy Grail of reveals. They would have gone completely nuts." He's not wrong. And now that he has said it, we can lament the fact that it didn't happen. Imagine a Warner Brothers studio panel in Hall H at the San Diego Convention Center, where Zack Snyder struts on stage in front of 6,500 rabid attendees to surprise reveal the Snyder Cut of Justice League. It would have blown the building's roof off. "But short of that," he continued, "I just felt like there's so much love out there for Man of Steel in the community. There's so much, in my opinion, just a great amount of goodwill around Henry Cavill and around that movie that I just felt like the viewing party was a great way to do it." He also explained why Gal Gadot, Ezra Miller, Jason Momoa, Ben Affleck, and Ray Fisher, the other members of Snyder's Justice League cast, didn't end up being part of the historic May 20th announcement despite their support over the years for the Release the Snyder Cut campaign. I talked to Henry about it because he and I started the journey together. And this felt it was appropriate to just have it be Henry, Snyder said. Never in his wildest dreams did Snyder imagine he'd be returning to his cut of Justice League so soon after having to leave it in 2017. Nor did he allow himself to ever fully believe that the studio would permit fans to see the director's complete vision of this epic story, and that he'd be given the chance to suitably prepare it for an HBO Max release. I was kind of expecting, one day maybe, because I had the cut. I was mostly thinking that when they do the documentary someday, it would be good to have a couple of scenes that they could cut too, he said. Snyder knows that his fan base's constant support for the Snyder Cut of Justice League convinced HBO Max to collaborate on this passion project. The director expressed complete awe at the RTSC movement's persistence and their unshakable resolve. I just felt like, as with anything, we would just be, sure, it's fine to be mad about it or feel like there was something more to see or something happened or whatever, but in the end, it's a movie. So I guess part of me just always thought that they would just not give up so much as the next thing would come along, Snyder said. There's a lot of noise in the world. There are a lot of noisy things to keep you occupied. But the movement itself generated more than enough noise. In the press release confirming Zack Snyder's Justice League on HBO Max, Warner Media Entertainment Chairman Robert Greenblatt singled out the nonstop requests by the RTSC community as a factor in the company's decision to back Snyder's cut. Since I got here 14 months ago, the chant to #release the Snyder Cut has been a daily drumbeat in our offices and inboxes, Greenblatt said. Well, the fans have asked, and we are thrilled to finally deliver. At the end of the day, it really is all about them, and we are beyond excited to be able to release Zack's ultimate vision for this film in 2021. Snyder couldn't help but laugh while discussing the omnipresent social media presence of the RTSC family, especially when it came to anything posted online by Warner Brothers, Warner Media, or HBO Max. Their websites, their Twitter, their everything, they were paralyzed. They were literally paralyzed, he said. They could make no release. They could talk about nothing. I was talking to an unnamed executive who said that HBO Max would tweet something about Sesame Street, and people would be like, "Fuck Elmo, release the Snyder Cut." That was the world they lived in. And they were like, "Jesus Christ, what are we supposed to do? We can't function." That's pretty rad. Show business is a business, and the support of RTSC movement through all its global Release the Snyder Cut activities gave the filmmaker the bargaining chips that he needed when he returned to the negotiating table with the studio. It was during, I think, 2019's Comic-Con where there was an article written that said, the biggest Warner Brothers and DC presence at Comic-Con this year is for a movie they'd never released. Which I was like, holy shit, that's amazing, Snyder said. We did all these analytics, and when we went in to talk to Warner Brothers about possibly releasing the movie, I said to them in the boardroom, you realize, I don't know if you're aware of it, but the most volume for any social media campaign for any movie Warner Brothers has ever done is for a movie that you guys never released. The most tweets, the most social media noise in the history of Warner Brothers is for a film that you guys don't have out. And at that stage in time had no intention of releasing. In what world is that okay? In what world does the business model support this point of view? It just seems insane. And apparently that didn't fall on deaf ears. But it's just a hard thing to argue with, Snyder continued. They would say things like, well, it's just a vocal minority. It's just a small amount of people. I'm like, okay, fair enough, if that's what you want to say. But if that's true, and it's not that big of a deal, how come you guys, a giant media corporation, cannot generate the same number of social media impressions as this vocal grassroots minority that aren't that big of a deal? How come you wish, in your best-case scenario, you could volumize one of your products in the same way that this handful of people, so you say, can do it? And if it is just a handful of people, you should have them working for you because they are unbelievable at their jobs, at their hobby, actually, because none of them are getting paid for it. How did we get to this point? Why did Zack Snyder walk away from the DCEU before Justice League was finished? Who let Joss Whedon butcher the existing Justice League footage and deliver what critics and fans dismissed as a mediocre film? How did the ceaseless demand for an incomplete movie get so loud that the studio, which altered it, could no longer ignore the calls? In short, how did Zack Snyder and his fans release the Snyder Cut of Justice League? We know this journey reached its official end on May 20th, 2020. Now, let's trace it all the way back to its beginning. 2. Why they fight. Why on earth did so many people care about an alternate cut of Justice League? The 2017 comic book blockbuster was an unmitigated disaster, the byproduct of too many cooks interfering in this superpowered kitchen. In an attempt to add humor to Zack Snyder's existing footage, replacement director Joss Whedon showed a complete lack of understanding for what makes the Justice League work. The usually somber Batman, Ben Affleck, cracked jokes. The Flash, Ezra Miller, was painted as a coward. The villain, Steppenwolf, looked like a video game character. The theatrical cut of Justice League bombed so emphatically on every conceivable level that it single-handedly torpedoed Warner Brothers and DC's ambitious dreams of an interconnected on-screen universe that would have paired Superman, Henry Cavill, Batman and Wonder Woman, Gal Gadot, with the remaining members of DC's planet-protecting armada. So, who actually fought to see the rumored 214-minute version of that movie? For one, there were the Nerd Queens, self-described as two girls who met on a Harry Potter website and now use the pseudonym The Nerd Queens online. Nana and Cole run a YouTube channel that celebrates their shared interests: travel, books, cosplay, comics, and Zack Snyder's contributions to the DCEU. The Nerd Queens first became actively involved with the RTSC movement during San Diego Comic-Con 2018, when they agreed to help distribute I Heart ZS t-shirts for attendees to wear, spreading the Snyder Cut gospel to the uninitiated. The entire experience that summer was unlike anything, Cole said. The moment we started handing out those shirts, it was like the crowd woke up around us and were discussing Zack and his work and mutual love for him. People who had spent the last few hours in line together but had not spoken were suddenly talking like best friends. I think it was in that moment it hit us just what this movement could be. A communal bond shared by strangers and an appreciation for Snyder that brings people together formed. These fans weren't even swayed by the knowledge that the Snyder Cut wasn't complete. Snyder himself clarified on the social media platform Vero on December 24, 2019, that his version at the time was not 100% finished, and that there's still some stuff I want to do, as with every film I've made. Snyder went on to emphasize that he's not sure what difference it makes as to the finished level of the film, but seemed to suggest that the hard creative decisions had been completed. But the movement wasn't about that, or completely about that. There's a lot more going on beneath the surface of the RTSC movement, and it's time that side of the story was told. Mighty motivations. Members of the RTSC movement will tell you that they primarily fought for the concept of artistic integrity to restore and defend Snyder's right to deliver his intended version of the Justice League story because of the ramifications that its release could potentially have on the film industry at large. To me, the Snyder Cut movement represents creative freedom and artistic integrity, said Lindsay Statton, a 21-year-old author and devoted Snyder Cut supporter from West Virginia. In Statton's words, the movement even reaches beyond Zack Snyder and his specific Justice League film. It's a constant, unrelenting voice for all directors who aren't allowed to express themselves in blockbuster superhero films. Just look at Scott Derrickson with the planned Doctor Strange sequel. He wanted to make a horror-esque film, but Disney and Marvel Studios wouldn't have it. So, what happened? They parted ways. And now Scott Derrickson isn't making a Doctor Strange sequel. This is exactly what we're fighting against. Similar sentiments are shared by 34-year-old RTSC member Joseph Todd from Illinois. This isn't just about Zack Snyder, said Todd, the co-director of a local transportation service for senior citizens and disabled individuals. This is a stand for every creative that was mistreated by a big studio. This is representative of standing up for the filmmaker and fighting for the creator's vision as a whole. Every filmmaker deserves for his or her vision to be seen, regardless of feelings on the content itself. Fighting for the artist is noble, but The RTSC movement ultimately caught my eye and touched.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?